Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Please keep eating. I'll try to keep my remarks so that they don't interrupt your food. Thank you all for coming. Good afternoon, and welcome to the very first of the Express Sessions, which is a series we hope to continue throughout the rest of the year. Today, of course, we're talking about having a conversation about affordable housing. My name is Brian Boyan. I am the former editor and publisher of the Sag Harbor Express. And on behalf of the staff of the Express, and we have Catherine Manu, who's our current editor and co-publisher, Steve Coates, news editor, who will help with moderating chores today. And I also want to point out Ellen D'Ogardi, who is event coordinator for us, and Gavin Manu, who is director of advertising and co-publisher. And Ellen and Gavin will help me move the mic around throughout the course of the afternoon. First, we want to thank our sponsors for making these sessions possible, many of whom are in the room here already. G.N. Ferraris, Public Accounting, our presenting sponsor, as well as the Sag Harbor Variety Store, Attorney John Leonard, the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce, B&B Bank, the Washwick Agency, and Burke & Sullivan, Attorneys at Law. Thank you all for helping and making this all possible. We'd also like to thank LTV for filming the sessions and providing technical assistance to make this afternoon possible. In a moment, we'll introduce our panel, and we'll ask each of them to elaborate on a specific question regarding affordable housing in our area. Following that, we'll open the floor to comments and questions from all of you. We would like this, as much as possible, to be a conversation between you, the people who live in this community, and the people up on the panel who help create the legislation laws that dictate how we live here. After that, we have a host of questions that we have the editorial board of the Express has created, and we'll try to work some of them in there. We ask you to keep your questions or comments brief, 1 minute or less. And Gavin and Ellen, who will be in the backs or the sides of the rooms, will help pass the microphone so that you don't have to get up and leave your seats. If you choose to ask a question without the microphone, please speak loudly so the conversation can be heard. We ask that the moderators, we as moderators will help guide the conversation, and ask that your comments are concise, respectful, and to the point so we can cover as much ground as possible today. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about affordable housing, and the conversation typically goes in many different directions. I suspect that's what's going to happen today. So we hope to cover as much ground as possible, so if you can keep your questions and comments as concise as possible, that'd be great. So, according to year-end statistics from 2016, the complete data from 2017 isn't available yet, developed by Town & Country Real Estate, the median home sales price on the South Fork from Montauk to West Hampton Beach was $975,000. According to figures provided by the town of Southampton, 2/3 of Long Island renters can't afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment. A recent canvass of the popular Facebook site Bonnock Rentals showed that even renting a room can cost anywhere from $700 monthly on the low end to $1,500. According to a 2015 Town of East Hampton report, the average home price in the town, has risen 215% between 1999 and 2015, with the median family income only increasing 43% during that same time period. Seasonal housing outweighed year-round housing and ownership and rentals 60% to 40%. At the same time, with an aging senior population, a workforce demand that triples in the summer, and a year-round population with a typical salary of between $29,910 and $100,470, according to figures provided by the town of Southampton. Finding housing to meet the demands of the population that sustains the South Fork is challenging at best. The lack of affordable housing options creates other burdens as well, including extreme traffic congestion on Sunrise Highway. NIMBYism also threatens to push most housing projects into just a few hamlets, overtaxing some school districts, while others enjoy smaller school populations, tax burdens, and, in some cases, a higher tax base. The lack of robust, affordable, year-round workforce housing impacts not only families, but businesses and the volunteers who sustain our local fire departments, ambulance corps, and nonprofit organizations. So what do we do? With that, we're going to turn to our panel, which includes, from left, Southampton Town Supervisor Jay Schneiderman, Diana Weir, the Director of Housing and Development for Southampton Town, Suffolk County Legislator Bridget Fleming, Rob Calvert, a member of the Board of Directors of the Sag Harbor Community Housing Trust, real estate agent Michael Daly, who is also a member of the Peer Next Gen Housing Collaborative, Catherine Casey, the Executive Director of the East Hampton Town Housing Authority, and East Hampton Town Supervisor Peter Van Scoyoc. While I'm at it, I also want to recognize we do have a distinguished guest, Jim LaRocca, who is trustee of the Village of Sag Harbor, is also in the audience. I wanted to acknowledge him. Also, Aidan Korish, another village trustee, is in the audience. Bear with me 1 second. I'm so organized. That's amazing. I have to do this for a living. We're going to open with a specific question for each of the panelists. And each panelist, we ask you to please, if possible, keep your answers to about 2 minutes. After that, we'll open up questions to the floor. We'll start with Supervisor Schneiderman. Supervisor, it seems whenever an affordable housing development is proposed, the local community comes out in opposition. But this week, Southampton Town broke ground on the 38-unit Scoyoc Commons, which with strong community support. How did the town bridge the gap and convince neighbors that this development was a good thing?
All right, thank you, Brian, and thank you for hosting and bringing this issue to the forefront. As been said, I'm Southampton Town Supervisor. I used to sit on the far end of the table as East Hampton Town Supervisor. So I bring, as well as in the middle of the table where Bridget is as a legislator for this region. So I have about 20 years in elected office, and this issue has been a constant issue. So even when I first was elected and I wanted to maybe work on some other things, all my friends kept coming and saying, we have to leave town. And it was a tragedy, and it continues to be a perplexing issue. So we did just make a big announcement. We broke ground, actually 2 projects, the Scoyoc Commons and Sandy Hollow. When Bridget was on the town board in this seat over here, recently, they actually approved the Sandy Hollow project, the initial approval, though the Scoyoc one was the current board. Pretty controversial when that happened. It was not the community and coming out, embracing it and loving it, but the town board did the right thing. They stood up and they recognized it had to be done. And even with local opposition, and the project had been changed and reduced, they did stand up and approved it, and we actually had to reapprove it with the new board. So let me just tell you really briefly, and 2 minutes isn't enough, and I probably used half of it already. The Scoyoc Commons initially did not have community support. In fact, they came out in large numbers against it. It was 51 units on 4 acres in a seemingly perfect site, right next to the train station, so transit-oriented, in a downtown, walk to everything. A blighted site, had boarded up buildings, seemed perfect. And we wanted to build 51 units, and they wanted to chase us away. And they sort of understood the need, as this room does, for affordable housing, but they felt like we were dumping on their community. It was too many. There were misconceptions about who these individuals would be, and the density was just too much. Now, it's a numbers game, so to make things affordable, you need the density. If you don't have the density, it can't be done. So as we look toward lowering the number of units, we had to figure out how to bring in some money. Which we looked to the county, which brought in significant amounts of money. We looked to the state, which brought in significant amounts of money, particularly in the form of housing credits. And then the Attorney General's office brought in additional money for affordable housing. So there was tremendous level of subsidy. We were able to make the project work at 38 rental units. And that's what we need. We need rental units, non-age restricted, affordable rental units. So there was a sweet spot there. And there were many, many meetings with the community, literally hand-holding. I recognize one individual, a guy named Craig Catalanoto, as being sort of the person that the community seemed to trust. There was a lot of social media networking going on. And I called him and I said, would you meet me for a beer? It's a place called Brewology in Scoyoc. And I sat down I don't even drink beer, but that night I did. And I said, we have to make something happen here. And I got his buy-in, and he recognized it, and that's where we kind of came up with this 38 number as the sweet spot where he felt he could get behind it, and then it was trying to line up all that additional outside funding. And so at the end of the day, when we held the last public hearing, and I saw the room was full, I'm like, oh God, they're still opposed to it. There must have been 40 people in the room, all the people who had spoke out against it, and one by one they came up to the microphone, and they supported it. I couldn't believe it. I would have been happy if they just didn't show up. But they actually came 180 degrees around to going from completely against this to in support of it. So it was a great success story. And, I think maybe the community is starting to change on this issue, that we're starting to get that buy-in. So thank you.
Thank you. Diana? You've proposed an initiative that would provide low-cost financing for qualifying residents who want to convert a portion of their homes into affordable accessory apartments. Can you tell us more about the progress of that initiative, and how many units would you like to see created, and how would you make sure they stay affordable?
Okay, well, this is one of Supervisor Schneiderman's initiatives when he first came in. We had worked on accessory apartment legislation when we were on the town board together in East Hampton, and that never really materialized. It was very early in the process. Now people are becoming more and more accepting of accessory apartments, and they can help pay their own mortgage if they have an accessory apartment, which makes it good for the homeowner, and then the tenant has an affordable, decent place to stay. And owner-occupied accessory apartments or rentals are really the best way to have rentals within a community, because the homeowner has a vested interest in who that renter is, how he maintains his apartment, how the homeowner maintains the property. So part of the initiative was to allow, the town of Southampton already has an accessory apartment law, but we wanted to make it so that if you wanted to build an accessory apartment or create one on your property, you would get an incentive to put that home apartment into our registry, our program, and allow it to be affordable. And with that, there were certain incentives. So one of the incentives was we would help you as a town to obtain the financing. I have been working with several local banks because they must comply with the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. And if they help with a lower interest rate, that would be beneficial to the bank and also beneficial to the town and the community. So it always has to be a win-win situation.
Can you tell me how you determine what affordability is?
Affordability is usually based on income. And the incomes are set by the Housing and Urban Development, by HUD. Every year, they do a survey with the American Community Survey, all jumbo-mumbo government stuff, and they come up with income levels for different areas. What we consider affordable here, a family of four, making $100,800 seems a lot for somebody that lives in Georgia. So they really take into account as much as they can the cost of living, which is important. We have high taxes, high oil costs, high transportation costs, if any. Not much transportation, but so those things are taken into account. Right now, a family of 4 on Nassau, Suffolk, which is the area HUD designates, the median income, which is 100% of the area, is $110,800 for a family of 4. Now, that sounds like a heck of a lot of money. But once you have a kid in college, you're both working, somebody's a mechanic, somebody's a school teacher, maybe you're making $100,000.
So a family of 4 who would be interested in one of these apartments, if they're making $100,000 and less, they would be eligible for one of these apartments?
Yes. Now, the apartments will be 2 bedrooms, so that limits, the occupancy according to the town code for everyone, not just for affordable apartments. So the homeowner would still have to abide by all the town code, setbacks, all the zoning codes that happen so that you don't impact the neighborhood inadvertently, have a negative impact on the neighborhood. But there would be no fees for any of the construction. So in other words, a building permit fee might be $500. All those fees would be waived if you're building an affordable accessory apartment.
How do you guarantee that property is going to remain affordable?
Okay, so that's my job. So what I'm doing now is kind of coordinating all the internal workings of the town's computer system. So we will coordinate with the building department, with the assessor's office, with planning to make sure that in our govern system, which is the computer system that governs the town's internal workings, we have a set area where we know that's affordable, when it was built, how it was built, and that would be in our program, and we would monitor that. So they would have to do an application fee to us. We would look at the lease as well when they lease to make sure that the lease states the proper amount. So it's all a matter of procedure, and that's kind of what I'm structuring at the town right now.
Thank you. Bridget, we're going to move on to you. The Suffolk County Affordable Housing Opportunities Program was recently tapped to give the Scoyoc Commons and Sandy Hollow Cove Apartments a $2.15 million financial boost. Given the cost of real estate on the South Fork, how sustainable and viable is this program as a continued funding source for affordable housing here? And what kinds of other financial options might have to be considered at the county level for there to be meaningful change?
That's a great question. And just to follow up on what Diana said about affordability into the future, obviously making rental units affordable in the near term is a much easier thing than making them affordable all the way into the future, and that's where the real money comes in. And it's usually done in contractual language within the development plan and between the funding sources and the developer themselves. So the Housing Opportunity Fund at the county level is composed of 2 different pots of money. One is for acquisition and one is for infrastructure. They're currently funded at $3 million and $5 million each, so it's not a huge amount of money. The state tax credits that were used for financing or are being used for the Scoyoc are at $26 million. So we put in, a little over $1 million to that project. It's not a lot of money in terms of the entire cost of the project, which are very considerable here on the East End, but they play a really, really important role. And I can say, having sat on the Southampton Town Board for the 5 years of public hearings it took to pass Sandy Hollow, and I have friends here from the town hall I see who remember this brutal process and enduring the litigation from the Not in My Backyard folks who brought lawsuit against us. I can say that this infrastructure money that we got from the county served a very important political purpose. Every single one of these projects need the constant political support of municipalities at every level. And that's true for the financing too, especially New York State financing. They want to see the local municipalities have skin in the game. So if I can say the county is supporting this project, even at $1 million, it's much more likely that you're going to rise in the competition for state dollars for the big money like the state tax credits. So it's critically important, and on Sandy Hollow, it was used for an innovative septic system originally. So I could argue to the community that was fighting this affordable housing project that we are, we have this hair on fire crisis with our surface waters and nitrogen loading. We're helping that too because the county is funding it. So hugely important. We do have a challenge at the county legislature right now because our majority has shifted. We had my caucus, which is the Democratic caucus, had a super majority, which meant that we could easily pass bond issues without question or bond authorizations. Now not so easy. So it's going to be a challenge, but we recognize that it's a very important challenge. Our county executive is very committed to transit-oriented development. Our governor is very committed to transit-oriented development. So to the extent that it helps not only at the local level push things forward politically, it also helps at the state level bringing down the larger funding. I think everyone on the legislature recognizes it. I feel safe that as long as we keep advocating, I'll rely on Jay's expertise to help me whip the votes, and we'll be able to get these projects over the finish line at the legislature.
Thank you, Bridget. Ron, the Sag Harbor Community Housing Trust has been working on developing a sustainable, affordable housing project at the cottages located just outside the village on Route 114 in Wainscott. Why did the nonprofit choose to go with a plan that is focused on sustainability and the environment? And do you see this as a model other projects could follow in the future?
Thank you, Brian. We do see it as a model, and the simple answer is this. It's the mission of the trust. It's what we strive to do, and that is to provide affordable and sustainable workforce housing for the year-round population in the general Sag Harbor area. But the question is deeper than that. It is both deeper for our organization and suggestively for this community. And by that, I mean we are inspired first and foremost by why. And those answers are strongly suggestive of what to do. Now, by some estimates, our community, the East End, needs 7,500 affordable housing units.
Can you define that community then? How large is that community?
I'm talking about the towns of East and Southampton. So if we are to meet that challenge, we can expect increased densities possibly of people and different land uses. And that's on an area that already has its attendant problems and quality of life issues. So the question is, can we do that in a way that is not impactful or have very little impact? So for us, that suggests it has to be sustainable and, if possible, regenerative. So what does that look like? How do we achieve that, and is it scalable? And if we implement it, can it be done in a way that builds resiliency and self-sufficiency within the community? And lastly, can the work increase our understanding of what it means to have a to have a community to preserve the community? So for us, it's a test case. It is a test case both of what to do as well as what is the role of a nonprofit organization in this challenge. And on the 114 project, it is for rental income, and it must be mixed income. And it also has to have very little impact both on the groundwater, on the site disturbance, and it needs to be near net zero performance. And we expect to achieve that in a way that increases the density over the Sag Harbor density 6 times. So that's what we wish to achieve. We think it's a necessary thing to do. As far as the individual unit that we're hoping to develop, it's a 600 square foot unit. That's the basic unit. And it is a low impact unit, and that we think it has application beyond our specific site, our specific project. There's so many projects that have been discussed and been proposed in our community. And when you have larger projects, they tend to create much more resistance within the community. So this is a model that could be used in low density situations that helps to avoid that kind of resistance from the community. But with some adjustment in within zoning legislation, It's conceivable that this could be used as a micro house on an existing single-family lot and have minimal impact.
Rob, let me just ask you one quick question. How many units are you expecting at the cottages?
Just 8
Just 8?
on a 2-acre site.
And so how many residents per unit?
The solution for us was dictated by the impact of our wastewater on the site. We have 1 3-bedroom unit and 7 1-bedroom units.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael. One of the recurring themes I hear is, I think in most, what I've heard from the 4 people speaking before, one of the biggest challenges is not in my backyard. And whether it's, Jay convincing people that, they're going to bring in extra money and it's going to be have a lower impact on the community, or in Rob's case, really showing that this is a environmentally sensitive project and it's probably something that's going to be good and beneficial for the community. Whether it be, this is kind of up your alley, whether it be a government campaign, nonprofit organizations outreach, or a grassroots movement, what specific efforts do you think need to take shape across our communities in order to turn the NIMBY mindset into a YIMBY mindset on affordable housing?
The term affordable housing has become a lightning rod. For those of us old enough to remember Dukakis and George Bush, the term affordable housing throws up like a Willie Horton image in a lot of people's mind. And a lot of that is driven by our own inherent desire to protect our own interests and even some of our own just latent racism. And it's just an unfortunate reality. But, as a real estate agent, I don't know. A lot of people think that real estate agents sit around waiting for people to call and buy overpriced McMansions. And the reality is when the phone rings, I don't know if it's going to be someone looking for a $15 million house or for a $1,500 apartment. And more and more and more am I getting calls for people looking for affordable apartments or houses to rent. I'm also getting calls from mature adults, people who are moving on in years and perhaps their houses aren't working for them. And it's one thing if you are fortunate enough to live in a $5 or $10 million house and sell that, well, then you can come to the village and buy a $2 million trade down. But if you live in a regular house here in our community that's worth $800, $900, even $1 million, if you sell that house, where can you go? So they have to leave the area. So we need affordable, community-based workforce as well as mature adult senior housing in every village and every hamlet in our townships.
How do you convince neighborhoods to welcome that?
To understand what a YIMBY is, you have to understand what a NIMBY is. And the NIMBYs are people who stand up and you want to see a NIMBY? I mean, God bless Jay and Diana and Bridget and the people who serve our public officials, because you go to one of the meetings and we see, an affordable housing project or development is coming up. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm sure they'll pass it. I'm sure it'll be there. Well, while we're at home in our feety pajamas watching Game of Thrones, the NIMBYs, oh, that's right, yeah, Channel 21. Is it 21? The NIMBYs are there full force with a kitchen sink full of reasons why not to pass this project. The Scoyoc project, I understand, started really 20 years ago. And what NIMBYs do is they cause delays in time as well as huge expense, carrying costs, development expenses, getting studies done, traffic studies, this study, that study. So in the 20 years it took to get Scoyoc, how many McMansions were built and how many young people, how many of our children or our family members did not get a chance to live here or had to move someplace where they have to drive 15, 20, 30 miles a day? How much fossil fuels has been burnt? How much time have we wasted in traffic because people who can't afford to live here don't?
So, Michael, what are
can't.
some of the strategies to combat that?
I don't know. I'm sure that some of us have been NIMBYs in this room. I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, it's a great idea to have affordable housing. And then we hear that it's going to be put around the corner from us. And then all of a sudden, well, water quality, density, start using all the coin phrases. Mm-hmm. I think the only way to turn that is for people who believe in doing the right thing to come to these meetings and stand up and support our elected officials. Mm-hmm. Because the people who don't want these things are going to be there to threaten them, to yell at them, to make up stories, to dramatically scare them into not doing it, and it's going to delay. It's going to delay the process. So if we want it, we have to get out and we have to be advocates for it.
Thanks, Michael. Catherine.
Excuse me, last thing. I have my last buttons from Yes in My Backyard here, if you'd like one. I just ordered one. And go on East End YIMBY on Facebook to read more about being a YIMBY.
Thank you, Michael. Catherine, one challenge the Housing Authority faces is obtaining state funding for some affordable housing projects, in part because of the perception that East Hampton is comprised of largely affluent residents, when the fact is about 20% of the year-round population pays as much as half of their income for housing. What are the actual demographics in terms of the need for affordable housing in East Hampton? And how does the Housing Authority get around the perception that the town is not just made up of wealthy homeowners?
The funding source largely is the state. It's the New York State Division of Homes and Community Renewal. And there are many sub-agencies under that. The elected officials up in Albany, the representatives are under a lot of pressure to get the most bang for their buck. When they're crunching numbers, when they're up in Albany and they're saying, okay, we have this finite resource, and there is a lot of funds. There are many funding sources and quite a bit of money available for affordable housing. New York is a big state. There's a tremendous need. There's need in other communities. Our market is such that from the outside, we are perceived to be quite comfortable. And there is truth to that. All of the applications for funding are competitive. We're always being compared to other initiatives in other locations. And our numbers, as Southampton is fully aware for Sandy Hollow and Scoyoc, with that $25 million, we're going to get fewer units than someone in Elmira or in Buffalo or in Olean or almost any other place in New York State. So where do you draw the line? How local does affordable housing need to be? It's also true that the investor partners who purchase the tax credits, which will be half of the development funding for almost any project under the current state initiatives and current funding sources. They all very much want to invest in this area. It's a high-profile project for them, dealing with the NIMBYism.
Thank you very much. No.
Is it me?
Yes. No, it's not you.
Dealing with the having the immediate community embrace the project is the first step, and then you take it to the next level, which in our case would be the county. And the county also has committed $1.128 million to the East Hampton Housing Authority's Amagansett project, also for wastewater treatment, on-site wastewater treatment. So having that county commitment is huge, and it helps us take the next step to go to the state. And the state does have federal funds, but we don't go directly to the federal government. The federal government allocates it to the state. All of these applications are very competitive. It's a constant, a bit of a tug of war we don't want to overdevelop a site, but we want to exercise all of our development rights, because if I can build 40 units, that's going to be so much easier to fund and manage and to operate, because none of these projects get ongoing subsidy. All of the, the electric, water, all of the utilities, we do pay taxes, we have maintenance costs. It all comes out of the rent revenues, but the rents are capped. So you can't charge whatever you want in rents. The more apartments we have, the more units we have, single-family homes or apartments, the easier it is to get it funded and to manage it. But you don't want to overdevelop the site. So,
in East Hampton, do you have a sense about how many people you're looking at would be eligible for affordable housing through town programs?
we did survey about 18 months ago. We took a look at all of our wait lists. And there are between Windmill, Whalebone, Housing Authority properties, and St. Michael's and Amagansett. We have approximately 800 people on all of the wait lists together. In addition to that, the Town of East Hampton Office of Housing and Community Development just the Office of Housing and Community Development just opened the Housing Choice Voucher List. And they are just under 3,000 applicants at this point. Tom Rule did report to the town. Do you remember what the number was? Was it 2,200, 2,500? And we're only halfway through the month. So it has been said that we could easily build 2,000 units in East Hampton, and this is workforce housing. It's
Right.
not restricted by age. And we can, in East Hampton, we can go up to 130% of area median income.
So this is a question, I'm guessing it's true, Southampton Town and East Hampton Town probably use the same HUD numbers. So what is that range of earnings for somebody to be eligible for affordable housing in the town?
When HUD throws out area median income as one number, that's always a family of four.
Right.
Because the average household size is 4. So area median income is a little over $100,000. That's for a family of 4. It's presumed that there are 2 wage earners and 2 dependents. So the Scoyoc, Sandy Hollow, and AMG 531, our Amagansett project, are all workforce housing. So we do have very low income units, and then units that go up to 100 or 110, 130, depending on the municipality and the project.
Thank you.
Sorry, so it's mixed income, and that's very intentional.
Right. I get the sense that in both Southampton Town, East Hampton Town, and the limited amount that's in Sag Harbor Village, we're all looking at really mixed income, mixed abilities. Is that correct?
At the moment, yeah. The state always has every funding round, every year, there are different initiatives. Right now, transit-oriented development is at the top of the list to try to get cars off the roads and get people with, to reduce commuting times, which improves quality of life for everyone, for the entire community, not just the residents of the project.
Right. Thank you. Peter? The Manor House project being built on Accabonoc Road includes 12 condominium apartments and 3 manor houses on a 3-acre parcel. Your predecessor, Larry Cantwell, talked about how this could be a model for future projects, as it does not require a lot of land and maintains an aesthetic that fits into the rural character of East Hampton. Do you agree? And can you speak to how the town pushes forward trying to create substantial affordable housing in the face of concerns about density and NIMBYism?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to this forum. As you all in the room know, this is a very daunting and complex issue. And I'll just start by saying that the Manor House project was first proposed almost 10 years ago. And it was waylaid by politics, frankly. The previous administration, before Cantwell took over, did not want to move it forward. The minority board members pushed hard, but were stopped in their efforts. Even once we got started and had a fully supportive board, it took 3.5 years to be able to break ground on a project that in concept had already been designed. The actual building plans and RFP process had been undertaken, and we didn't have health department approval, but all that took basically 3.5 years to get 12 units. The property we'd owned for almost a decade. You know, I do think that the Manor House project in many ways can alleviate some of the concerns of NIMBYism, which is that it's a project that doesn't meet the sort of the standards, the aesthetics of a neighborhood situation, that it looks like somehow contrived. The Manor House is basically what looks like a large farmhouse, and it has various modules that could fit together in different configurations to look like a larger Hampton-style, you know, house that we're seeing now. Only it's increasing the density on the property, and as we all know, density's a key component of having housing affordability. We are kind of at cross purposes here on the South Fork because we've spent a great deal of time, energy, and money and zoning efforts to reduce density wherever we could and protect the environment and our quality of life. But we're now like in a crisis situation when we look around and we see how the cost of housing is tearing away at the fabric of our community, the continuity of our history here, and it's forcing people who once could afford to stay in town, the basic fabric of our community. I'll give you an example. When my wife first started teaching school in East Hampton School District about 27 years ago, 90% of all the teachers lived either in East Hampton or just across the border in Southampton. They had very short commutes. Now that number is exactly flipped. Maybe 10% of teachers are able to afford to stay in town. And you know, in terms of long-term, year-round employment, teachers, police officers, and merchants are really, you know, the best year-round jobs in town. So, you know, we've seen that change. You know, we're now talking about providing affordable housing for that whole sector of the economy. The Manor House, I think, can be duplicated throughout town in various neighborhoods. But I also want to say that we've undertaken hamlet studies in furtherance of finishing our comp plan, looking at the downtown business districts and ways in which affordable housing can be located more centrally to developed areas through having second-floor apartments in business areas. You know, and I think it's not lost on many of us that having community support for any project that we put forward is vitally important, and the loudest voices get heard. So it's absolutely critical that people who believe in having affordable housing within our towns come out and support it whenever that opportunity arises.
So this is, I mean, just to kind of recap, an enormously daunting task. In East Hampton Town, you're looking probably at 3,000 residents that are looking for housing that would be considered affordable. I'm imagining in Southampton Town you have similar numbers, if not greater numbers?
Absolutely. We have a housing registry. Oh, absolutely. We have a housing registry that I'm getting about 5 or 6 registrants every other day. So probably 10 or 12 people a week.
So
we have almost 700 people.
Ballpark, about what number in Southampton Town do you think would fit into or would pursue affordable housing if given the opportunity?
Between the Section 8, the Housing Authority, and us, I would say over 2,000 or 3,000.
Okay. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up. This is your conversation. You have these people who are making decisions in front of you. Here's an opportunity to ask them a question. Does anybody want to offer a first question to these folks? Oh, come on, I know you people here. You're not shrinking violets. Not a Barry.
Known for asking questions, obviously. I was curious, I think I heard correctly, something about 600 square feet for an apartment. Why only 600 square feet? Can't it be larger if there is a place that it would suit?
Rob, I believe that question's probably directed at you. Question is, 600 square feet seems a little skimpy for an apartment. Why 600 square feet?
That number is a function of the fact that they were 8 certificates of occupancy on this site when we purchased the property. And we, by right, could use those certificates of occupancy to replace the existing facilities. The county health department has certain standards that attach the size of a housing unit to a sanitary flow. So the first increment is 600 feet, and it's 450 gallons per day. So we had to figure out how many units we could create on the property and juggle the maximum amount of sanitary flow that we could discharge onto the site. So it just so happened it worked out. The best we could do were 7 one-bedroom units with a sanitary flow of 150 plus a single 3-bedroom unit with a very different calculation to stay under the maximum allowable sanitary flow.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Just Rob, and not to change the project, I know this is you guys have been working on it. That's it within the town of Southampton, and we do have a bank of affordable housing sanitary credits that we make available for free that'll help you meet the county standards. So if you wanted to add more to it, you could get those county health department approvals for that. We have hundreds of them, and we'd be happy to use them.
Thank you. Bridget?
I wonder if I could just make a follow-up point to your very important question about the perception of this region in Albany, because the state funding sources are so critically important. We can't rely on HUD. We can't do it ourselves. And I don't think it's so much the perception in Albany that we have everything that we need and we're an affluent community, but it's the numbers. It's very expensive to build projects here because of acquisition costs and because of cost of labor and materials. It's much more expensive here. So it is really important, because the folks in the state want to get the most bang for their buck, as Katie pointed out. We need to convince them that it makes sense to build these expensive projects. And I think the way we do that primarily is through local support. And at this point, not only is it important who you elect, because we have to be able to withstand resistance and, keep pushing on and make this a top priority, but we also have to be able to have skin in the game. So for Scoyoc and Sandy Hollow, Southampton Town waived permitting fees. We expedited the permit process. They entered into a pilot agreement with the developer, so payments in lieu of taxes, that worked for the school district. Very, very important. You also need local investment, real hard dollars. So the county, for the most part, a lot of these projects are relying for their skin in the game at the local municipal level on county dollars. They're limited to the extent that folks that are sitting on village boards and town boards can support with direct investment some of these projects that's going to allow them to rise in the competitive, in the competition for funding at the state level.
So let me ask most of you here. A lot of the conversation here is about what the municipalities, whether it's the town or the local governments, can do. And clearly you are the leaders in providing affordable housing, but you're looking at 5,000, 6,000 residents in our area that are looking for housing. Can the municipalities do this alone, or are there greater relationships that can be developed with private business or private industry?
I'd like to address that,
Sure.
if I may. The municipalities cannot do it alone. There is not enough tax revenue. You can't tax your immediate community enough to build these projects. These projects are very expensive. To kind of follow that train of thought, in a sense, we have to sell it locally. It is our responsibility to educate the community to the overall community benefits. It benefits not only the residents of these projects we're talking about, this workforce housing, transit-oriented development. It benefits the entire community. So if we are successful in educating our community, then you get the local buy-in, and you get not only the favorable legislation, fees waived, all of that, but dollars. funding. The state is looking for a local buy-in, financial contribution of approximately 30%. So a successful funding application in Albany shows that on the county and municipal level and other local funding sources, 30% of this is being funded locally.
Yeah, sure.
First on the need, there's a great study that the county did with Rutgers University, and it's available online, and it did an allocation per town, like per zip code, in terms of what the need for that community was. And it's thousands of units. And if you look at what government is doing, and you hear these stories of how many years each project is taking, 3 years or 9 years to just get a few units, you realize that the answer isn't going to be entirely from government. And Kathy's point about the subsidy, this is true. We don't have enough revenue to subsidize very many of these things without starting to make everybody else, their taxes would go up and everything would become less affordable for those who are hanging in there. So there has to be a way for the free market to produce some housing. It's not doing it now. It's not doing it now because it can't. It can't because the cost of land is too high. So if you're going to buy a piece of property and it's zoned for one home and the land itself is $1 million, there's no possible way you're going to end up with an affordable unit there. So we have to figure out a way, and the accessory apartment idea may be one of those ways, to take a house that maybe a senior citizen, the kids are off to college or moved into other communities, maybe they couldn't live here anymore. You've got a 3-4 bedroom house, maybe it's 2,000-3,000 square feet, one person, two person. They're dealing with a fixed salary, fixed income, and their rising costs of living. Probably would love to have some revenue. They could get that revenue. Now, what if a third party, let's say a bank or a lender, were to come in and say, look, you don't have to encumber yourself. Don't go and borrow $50,000 to put an apartment in. We'll build that apartment and we'll get paid back as a percentage of the rent. So no mortgage, nothing. Now suddenly they don't have to lay anything out and they're going to receive $1,000 a month in revenue they weren't getting. And we waive all the building permit fees and we help them through the process. So right now they couldn't put that accessory apartment in because it's against the law. If they, 3/4 of an acre is the minimum on the current law. Most people with large lots don't live walking distance to downtown. They're not the ideal sites. We want to be able to allow those accessory apartments closer, in a more walkable communities. So I think if we can unleash the power of the free market, I think we'll see the hundreds of types of units. Now, that being said, we have a pretty aggressive program. You'd heard about Scoyoc and Sandy Hollow, but there are a number of others. Typically not that much density on one property, but maybe 8 or 16 here and there. In total, a couple hundred units that you'll be hearing about in the year ahead. Plus, when Bridget was on the town board, they rezoned the Riverside area to allow for, I think, 1,000 potential new units. So you're starting to see the potential numbers, not maybe the 5,000 that we need, but a much more significant move forward toward creating affordable housing, both internally and using free market forces.
Thank you.
Can I also add,
Yes,
we
sure.
have a private sector because there is the Long Island Workforce Housing Act, which is how the Housing Trust in Sag Harbor got funded because they were not able to build at the Sag Harbor site. They put money in the fund. But in Southampton, we have 3 developments right now that are going to create about 20 units that have no public funding. This is the Workforce Housing Act, which is inclusionary zoning. One is those units on County Road 39 that you see as you drive by.
Yes.
There will be 15 affordable units there. They're lovely, 2-bedroom.
Out of how many total?
Out of 50. And in Watermill, we have a small development going there. There'll be 4 units of affordable home ownership there. So you are seeing it in dribs and drabs. We didn't see it over 10 years with the legislation because building stopped. Banks weren't giving mortgages. Banks weren't giving construction mortgages. But now we see an uptick in these developments that may have 2, 3, 4, up to 10. So that's also a way. There isn't just one answer. It has to be many answers.
Multiple answers. Bridget, you had a comment?
Thank you. Yeah, just to back on the private partnership aspect of this, absolutely critical. And these 3 remarkable rental units, that Sandy Hollow was the very first rental units east of the canal in history, yeah, affordable, and then Scoyoc in Southampton. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Kitty, and Peter. But Scoyoc follows, and then the Amagansett project that Katie's working on is the same. Those are all being done with state tax credits by a private developer. So the state gives credits, which then can then be sold on the open market. I think something very important to bear in mind is there's pressure on that program now because of the new tax laws, right? So because the corporate tax rate was dropped from 35 to 21%, that makes those tax credits less valuable. So that's going to put pressure, and there's a very good article in the New York Times on this today, actually. That will put pressure and make it more difficult for these private investors to see it as worthwhile. So that's where the local support comes in really important.
I want to go back to one question that one thing you just raised, just for those of us who might not understand the process so much. In layman's terms, can you explain the sale of tax credits and why that is appealing to a developer?
So quickly. It's a market, right, where if a corporation is paying too much in taxes, they can purchase tax credits that will lower their effective tax rate. If they already have seen their tax rate lowered so dramatically, there's less value to the vehicle that's going to pull that rate, their effective tax rate down.
Right.
So, for instance, when I believe when Scoyoc, when the private developer was first negotiating Scoyoc, he was committed $1.14 per tax credit. Today, it's $1.04. It's significantly less, and it changed when the current administration came into office. The banks already anticipated that this change was on the way and changed their practice. J.P. Morgan dropped out of the market altogether. They're not even participating, and this happened a year ago. So there is more pressure.
Thanks, Bridget. Michael?
Brian, the state of California and several other municipalities are starting to add on fees for real estate purchases to go towards affordable housing. Now, we have what's our Community Preservation Fund. And the Community Preservation Fund has done a great deal to help preserve the natural beauty and quality of our area. But, how about putting a little bit of those funds towards community? And if we can carve out $750 million out of the projected $2 billion that CPF will raise over the next 25 to 30 years. If we can carve out $750 million for water quality, why can't we carve out another $750 million for housing?
So let me ask the two supervisors if they believe that is a realistic possibility. Peter?
Well, I absolutely think that if you had a transfer tax that took into consideration was a reserve fund just for affordable housing, that would go a long way towards being able to fund the needs for affordable housing now and into the future. I think there's been resistance to make changes to the CPF fund, but I think that's a worthy pursuit of CPF of monies. I think when you look long-term, how much land is there left to preserve? In East Hampton, we've been very aggressively buying land for the last 4 years. We've bought over 300 acres, and we've removed several dozen houses, I think, at this point from our purchases, which created new waterfront accesses on our bays, harbors, and creeks. And I think that's really important in protecting our environment, removing septics that are in our marshes and flushing daily into our harbors. But at the same time, we see the incredible need, and funding is always going to be a problem. And I think it's a valid use of those funds going forward.
Jay, the same question to you. The suggestion is that since there seems to be an enormous pot of money in CPF, is it realistic to believe that we could use some of that money for affordable housing?
Is it realistic? I would say no. It's not that it's a bad idea, and it's not.
Why do you think that?
And it's not a new idea. I've been pitching this for a long time, and it's really a good conversation to have with Assemblyman Thiel, who's been the the person really most responsible for putting this in place. It's great. It's generated over $1 billion for land preservation, and it really has protected our environment and who we are in many ways. At the same time, the downside of it, it has driven the price of the remaining land up because of all this common land. It's also that supply and demand equation, and it's made affordability even harder. And it hasn't really provided any money to address that. But I don't know that it's just funding that is the issue here. I think we have to be willing to recognize that some of our zoning needs to allow that free market, as I said, to be able to create some affordable housing. I have seen times when the CPF fund, in a way, has competed with affordable housing, where you've laid out a piece of property and said, okay, this would be a good spot to build 50 homes, and somebody said, well, we should preserve that. And it's a lot easier politically to preserve the land than to develop it. And sometimes there's a compromise where the CPF may buy half of it, and then you end up with a small thing. So they do compete a little bit. And I think it's fair to say, okay, I certainly understand we should attach some of that money for affordable housing. But Fred has mentioned maybe on the larger homes, there would be almost like a mansion tax if you're over 5,000 square feet, a certain per square footage, like maybe another source that could help fund affordable housing. But I would say at the town of Southampton level, it is not right now a funding issue that is preventing affordable housing. So I think it's the zoning. That's probably the biggest piece here, and the community willingness to politically accept it. And guys like Michael's been coming out to meetings and supporting these things. I think he's right. The more political support the electeds have, I think it makes it a little bit easier. But I would not touch, at this point, the CPF fund. I would leave it alone. They just changed it. I just don't think the will would be there to go back to Albany, go back to the voters, change it so that some of that preservation and water quality money would be diverted toward housing.
Catherine?
East Hampton did something pretty creative a few years ago. There was a large parcel under consideration for CPF purchase. It was actually 3 different parcels, but they were all adjacent, contiguous. The town decided, and the CPF committee, they vet the properties and there's much discussion. East Hampton Town opted to purchase approximately 18 acres for CPF for preservation and omitted one of the parcels that was 4.6% that already had an affordable housing overlay. So there's 18 acres immediately in perpetuity preserved, stripped of development rights, and then right next to it is this parcel that the Housing Authority is working to develop with the Amagansett 531 project. So that was a creative, an instance where East Hampton Town said, okay, yes, we want to do CPF, but we're not going to gobble up this entire piece. We believe this is appropriate for housing here, so they exempted it from the purchase.
Thank you. Audience, Susan.
I have a question for Rob. You mentioned a 600 square foot unit or apartment. Do you have a price point on that, what it would cost to construct such a unit, 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom?
We do. The most recent estimate that we have on a blended rate between the 1 and the 3 bedroom is $230 a foot. If you include the cost of the development of the land, it adds about $90. So that's that's approximately $320 per square foot to do that. So multiplied by 600 square feet, that's under effectively a market rate of $200,000 for the unit, which makes it, if it were being sold, it would make it a very attractive thing. Now, to do that, we have to take the cost of the land out of the deal. That is the prevailing problem. It's not being able to do this effectively, cost-effectively. It's not able to doing it efficiently in a way that won't impact the groundwater and other problems. It's primarily a question of how do we take the cost of the land out of the equation.
So just to follow up on that, pardon me, we get the mic to you? Is there a way that you could encourage homeowners who might be interested in funding such a unit themselves and then to attach to their house, because I know that in East Hampton you're able to do that. You can attach a 600 square foot separate unit that's completely independent, and then to get the owner of the home who might be interested in rental income to make that investment. Is that something possible?
It is. It's an excellent idea, particularly now that we have some innovative wastewater systems that are coming online. So with a modest increase in capacity, here's an opportunity to say to that homeowner, if willing to make certain adjustments in terms of single-family land use, that is the primary problem that we're dealing with here. If we're going to let the homeowner change the septic system, increase its capacity slightly, there's no reason why we shouldn't also entertain on lots of a particular size to have a micro house that goes in the backyard. That may be a lot more attractive way to go about it, because you design a unit that's incredibly efficient. You know how it's going to be performed. It's modularly constructed. It can be brought to the site with minimum amount of disruption and setup time. That may be a much more attractive way to solve the problem than hoping that an owner is going to modify the house, maybe irreparably or very difficultly, to accommodate an affordable apartment within the unit itself.
Thank you, Rob.
Can I answer that? Yeah. The town of Southampton, we all, in our legislation, in our accessory apartment legislation that exists right now, not the affordable one, and the affordable one will follow suit, we allow dwellings and apartment to be built inside the home, attached to the home, or detached from the home. And one of the ideas that has been suggested is the tiny home, because the tiny homes can be brought on and put, if the property allows, with the setbacks, and those tiny homes have their own septic type of system. It's called a balloon or a bubble that can be emptied out. It causes absolutely no harm to the groundwater. So that is an excellent idea, and that is being considered, and like I said, town of Southampton already has that included in its code.
Thank you. Anybody want to see? I have a question back over here. Let me give you the mic.
Yeah, you know, having filmed these government hearings for years and years for Southampton and attended a lot of the East Hampton ones, I can tell you there's a few things. There's the government and the elected officials, there's the taxpayer, and then there's the school. And a typical example is Wainscott, a year ago or maybe longer, decided they didn't want to have low-income housing because their little red schoolhouse would change and they would have to build an addition and their taxes will go up. Well, I found out I pay like 5 times more taxes than people in Wainscott. So, you know, where the elected officials stand on making laws about low-income housing in certain districts because you're pitting one hamlet or one district against the other. People in Springs are overloaded, people in Wainscott are empty. Please.
Yeah, that's a good question. So how do as town officials, how do you balance a fair allocation of affordable housing throughout the town? Peter?
Well, I think that is really the key word, is balance. And I think that every hamlet has a responsibility, every school district has a responsibility to accept a certain amount of affordable housing. You know, we have seen a couple of instances where school districts have actually, you know, complained or said that, you know, this will have an undue burden to our school because we'll have to educate more children. Well, I just am blown away by that kind of a statement. Isn't that the basic charge of every school and every school district, to educate children? And, you know, so I think it goes back to really a moral question, and that is, don't we as a community have the moral responsibility to educate all the children within our township? And, you know, this is only exacerbated by the long-standing fact that we have multiple school districts in a very small town. And I understand historically how that comes about, because when you were taking your walk from, you know, Amagansett to school, you weren't going to walk to Montauk to go to school back in the 1700s. You know, there once was a schoolhouse in Northwest. There was a whole village there that's since gone. But the point being, you know, I think everyone within the town has an equal responsibility to educate the children, which belong to all of us collectively. And our future depends upon it.
Is there
And
anything that that the townships can do? And I think I sense his frustration is that we could express our outrage, but is there anything from a legislative standpoint, or from a legal standpoint, or from a way of inspiring?
Well, let me just tack onto that by saying that we're looking at opportunities to bring affordable housing to all sectors of our community, to all hamlets, and Katie's putting forward a project in Amagansett. There's been some resistance to that, but I think working together with each hamlet, we don't want to change the basic character of our hamlets, but at the same time, we know that we have to get this done, and every hamlet really has its share of responsibility to do so. In Springs, which is the de facto affordable housing area of town, the town really hasn't built any affordable housing units there. Vast majority of affordable housing within East Hampton is within the East Hampton School District. But there's what's that mean? What's that mean? Okay.
Meeting got lively quick, huh?
So,
Batteries are fine on everything. See?
So my point is that going forward, we have a community responsibility throughout every hamlet to take this problem on head on, and it's really an ongoing discussion and working with each community to see that happens.
Bridget, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I do. I think it's me that's setting off this noise. Sorry. I appreciate the question. I think it's an extremely good one. When I was on the Southampton Town Board, folks in Flanders and Hampton Bays said, we're already affordable. Don't keep putting affordable housing in our area. And what we did, I was talking to Diana before the meeting, what happened on the town board before Sandy Hollow came in and then Scoyoc was everyone insisted that it be for home ownership. So any resolution that came through the town board that had anything to do with housing, someone would insert that language for home ownership, because people are so afraid of rental housing in low cost, relatively low-cost areas. So the key, that's why Sandy Hollow is so revolutionary, because it's east of the canal in the town of Southampton, and it's rental, and it's fairly dense, 28 units. So I think the key has to be, we have to recognize the neighborhoods that feel overloaded, Springs, Hampton Bays, Flanders, and we have to come up with the solutions that are more dense. So you have the private ownership, the private partnership, and then you have these financing solutions like the state tax credits with county support as well. And this is the only way you're going to get past the problem of the very high cost of building projects in areas where they're most needed.
I think probably the question really was about, and this is something I think it's worth pursuing a little bit, is about how you convince areas that come out in force. We watched in the newspaper, watched in horror as Wayne Scott came out and basically said, you're not building these units in our neighborhood. How do you combat that?
But that happened with Sandy Hollow. It was 5 years. Do you remember those public hearings? They went on hours and hours and hours. It was so painful. And then they sued us once we passed it. So we have the same problem. However, you need to work with the community and work with the private developer to understand how you can hit the sweet spot of the number of units. You add the fact that it's not going to impact the environment by having the county fund some advanced wastewater. You have to find the components that are going to make it more comfortable for the community to accept it. Otherwise, it's never going to happen.
Right, Peter?
I just want to add one more thing about you brought up Wayne Scott, and I think there's a public misconception about exactly how that went. They did resist the idea, but also the developer was unwilling to enter into discussions about changing the number of units and so forth. So, it was sort of a take it or leave it offer in that situation. So,
okay.
I do think going forward there are going to be opportunities.
Thank you. Michael?
But coming back to the YIMBY point is, if we wait for our elected officials to do this, it's not going to happen unless we support them. We have to come out. We have to speak. We have to encourage our neighbors. We have to, and sometimes the YIMBY has to shame a NIMBY, just like the NIMBY is shaming the public official. You know, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And we have to be there to advocate for it, to talk to our neighbors, to appeal to their sensibilities, and to help educate them.
Thank you, Michael. I have a question. Yeah, sure, Jay.
Yeah, this one's blowing up.
We just sold an affordable house with an affordable apartment attached in Sagaponack. Sagaponack comes up as like one of the top price zip codes in the country over and over. Like median housing sale price around $8 million, right, in Sagaponack. So even in the most expensive areas, we can do it. When we go to like site-specific density projects, we're always going to end up with opposition. And what we have seen too with the areas that are most affordable now, where the market is producing affordable, relatively affordable, those areas like Springs, that's where the workforce is concentrating itself. Hampton Bays, concentrating itself, and those areas don't want more, and I understand it. We had looked as whether there's ways to create incentives to go to the areas that aren't producing affordable housing, and maybe figure out ways to induce development there. So, you know, I don't think that's an easy one, but I really want you to look at the school demographic numbers, because I think what you're going to find is not that schools are increasing in numbers. Maybe Springs and Hampton Bays, and even Hampton Bays has leveled off. But if you look at Montauk and Amagansett and Bridgehampton and Pearson, they are falling by 10 or more %. They need kids just to get back to where they were. So in terms of like convincing these communities to embrace affordable housing, I think we're just trying to get them where they were as a community. And I have to say, when the workforce can't live in the community, you lose part of your soul. When the teachers can't come to the play at night and the nurses can't respond to an emergency at the hospital because they don't live anywhere near here, we may have preserved our land, but we haven't preserved our community. Our community is who we are. It's the people and the places. And so I think the community is starting to understand it more and more, but I think it would be helpful if the demographic numbers, of these schools, people would understand that school population is falling. Birth rates have fallen tremendously, so that when you look at the incoming kindergarten classes and the one after that, it's dropping faster and faster and faster. So we've lost a lot of our workforce, and I think we have to accept it and figure out a way to get it back.
Thanks, Jay. I want to move on. Sir?
What I would like to point out is that I think the difficulty is in trying to quantify what are the consequences of not having workforce or next generation housing. And if you can quantify that by saying the hospital can't attract the best residents and the best interns, and the schools cannot attract the best teachers because they can't afford to live here and they don't want to commute for an hour. And what is it when a teacher drives from Greenport to come to Southampton or from the North Fork, and then they don't spend any money here because they go back and spend the salary back home, so they're not supporting our commercial areas and our stores. The hospital, the school districts, the biggest employers have to step up, and the silent majority has to overcome the vocal minority and explain to them that this is for the good of the community. And the biggest component, the most expensive component of building workforce, next-gen housing, whatever you want, however you want to label it, is the cost of the land. And if you go across the street behind Apple Bank, you'll find a very big empty parking lot. It's full now with cars. But if you built something over it in this commercial or village district, there are no homeowners really in that area who are going to object. And people can live there. They can walk to the stores. The same thing in the village of Southampton. You have these parking lots. The town owns the land. They get no taxes. So you build something over it, and if you build it big enough, you can put in a septic system. You can have the commercial stores and the restaurants tie into that septic system. the sewer system, and then you can have residential housing in the villages, in the hamlets, without the cost of land, because it's free. The land is free. I've been doing this for over 50 years in the government housing industry, and it can be done, but you've got to get the people behind supporting the government officials. They need the courage and the knowledge that they're not going to be booed, they're going to be cheered when they say we're approving this project because we believe it's the best for the community. And if, as I say, the commercial, the commercial stores, the business community gets in and says, we need this here so we can have employees and we can stay open longer because these guys want to get home to their families and it takes them 3 hours, an hour and a half each way. And that's how you resolve the problem. Can you tell us your name? Myron Holtz.
Hi, I'm Diane Buckin. I'm directing this to Jay and Diana. I'm a parent, a homeowner, and a business owner. And this affects me in all areas. When we moved into our house in 1996, 900 square foot house to raise my family, there was a garage with a toilet, kitchen, and shower, which when we doubled the size of our house so our kids could have a bathtub, we had to get rid of. Now you're saying that the accessory buildings can be on 0.75 acres, but out in Oyak we have 0.3 acres. But on my street there are at least 4 or 5 houses that could easily convert into housing for our employees. And I'm just wondering, is there any legislation for that, for the smaller lots? Right, so on the free market.
So thank you. That's right now, no. That if you wanted the accessory apartment in the town of Southampton, you need 3/4 of an acre. What we're trying to change is to say, no, you can have an accessory apartment on smaller lots down to 1/3 of an acre, like you're talking about, but it would have to be part of our program. So the rent would be affordable. The person who was living in that apartment would be income qualified. And we will help you get the permits and waive the fees and do everything, get the financing, because you're helping us solve a problem. Now, that law doesn't exist yet. We are working on that law. So when we go to public hearing, please come out and support it.
Well, my other question is...
Yeah, we'll let you know. We'll let you know.
You'll
read about it.
As a parent, I have a kid graduating from college this year. I have to tell her she has to move away because there's no... obviously, she has her bedroom. But if she wanted to come and live and launch, as we want our children to do, there's no place for her to go. If I could have a free market apartment in my garage without all of the restrictions...
We do have a mother-daughter legislation that exists right now that is not affordable. So in other words, if you had a mother-in-law or your mom or your daughter that you wanted to create a space for her, as long as that space passed all safety and health issues, and you were able to meet code, no problem. So there is an opportunity now in the regular accessory apartment legislation within the town.
Good to know.
Okay?
Thank you.
If you need help, just call us.
Hi, my name is Lisa Field. I have a question about when you want to bring things into the private market, are you prepared to have tax incentives so that if you decide to, I have a commercial building and there's apartments above the building, is there going to be a tax incentive so that it would be advantageous for me to offer those apartments at an affordable rate rather than say, well, if I bring in new construction, I could get X number of dollars.
Yeah, that is the intention.
That's commercial, but before you answer, if you could then also just say, for the individual homeowner, what's the incentive for me to like the ongoing incentive as far as tax breaks, or is there one?
Okay, so let me take the second half first with a homeowner in this accessory apartment program that we're talking about, where you're literally entering this apartment into our program, you're helping us solve the need. Our intention is that your taxes, your assessment will not go up because of it. So you won't pay any additional taxes, property taxes, because of it. So you'll have the additional...
There's no incentive where you're planning to say, hey, if we entice these people with lower taxes, that might make them want to
Well, you'll get the income without the increase in property assessment, right? So you get the income and we won't take it away from you.
I understand that there'd be income. I get that.
Right. Now, in terms of the commercial side, if somebody, a developer wanted to build affordable housing, there are a lot of tax incentives that exist now.
I'm talking about existing on Main Street apartments above businesses that are already existing.
Is there a tax
incentive to say to the people, wow, you currently have 3 apartments and currently local people can afford to live there and work in the village. But then you say, well, if I put a couple of $1,000 into this, I could get 3 times as much every month than what I'm getting. So again, you're going to get more income, but if there was a tax incentive, or I'm just thinking that's something that really needs to be incorporated.
That is
in all of this
absolutely
planning.
something that we can consider. It's not in legislation now, but if there was a commercial property where you had pre-existing conforming apartments and you wanted to put them into the town program, the incentive for taxes is something that we would definitely consider. I will put that into discussion, because we still haven't finalized the affordable.
Needs to be reducing the taxes that are currently paid, not just we won't increase your assessment.
No, I got that, but we're not going to reduce it enough to offset the income that you would get at market rate. So I hope you understand that too. So, but that is definitely something that we can consider, and we'll bring that up to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Somebody from this side of the room. Oh, hang on, I'll go over here.
Hi, my name is Steve D'Angelo. My question is, I don't know if it's working. My question is, touching on what she was saying on the other side of the room, which I happen to have given some thought to, is with all the funds that it seems like the government levels are spending on multiple unit affordable housing, it seems to me that if you offset some of that spending towards individual investors of homeowners, I mean, if you do a search on almost any property out here, it tends to be an LLC of some second homeowner who's doing it as an investment or using it as a seasonal or what have you. There are a lot of houses out here that won't ever be that Hampton's estate with a pool and a pool house and a tennis court. There are a lot of houses out here that are on too small of a lot that won't be expanded. Why not come up with an incentive, and let's not call it affordable housing, let's call it incentive housing, where someone can get an incentive from our local governments or state or federal, whatever level we can do, and make it worthwhile for that homeowner to rent it at a rate that is not going to make them want to do a summer rental or an Airbnb rental. I think that the spread is actually not as far away as everyone thinks. If you have a 3-bed, 2-bath house in Noyak and you could get $45,000 for it from Memorial Day to Labor Day, you might be able to get that same amount for a year-round rental, and it might make sense if there's enough incentives on a tax level for someone to consider that.
Can I answer that? Sure. Because we are a nonprofit, 501c3, one of the advantages that we have but have not fully leveraged is the notion of addressing or assisting someone like yourself. Rather than rent that house or even sell that house to what the open market would demand, you could in fact get a tax credit for the delta between what the market rate is and what an affordable rate is, and we could provide that tax credit potentially. That's an idea that we've kicked around. We think it has an applicability with regard to people who sell their houses. If they're in the right tax situation and it's to their advantage to sell the house to us, we maintain long-term covenants on it, we maintain its affordability, then we help to bolster the homeowner market in addition to the rental market, but both through the notion of providing the owner a tax credit to supply affordable housing.
Catherine?
The flip side to the high cost of creating a unit of housing in our market is that the rents are so high. The government also calculates maximum rents. They call them fair market rents, and they look at the open market. You might be shocked to know that with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and prior to being at the Housing Authority, I worked for 12 years at the Office of Housing and Community Development, so it kind of blends all into one for me. But you might be surprised to know that for a 3-bedroom house, the subsidy can be $2,800 a month. That's not $45,000 a year, but it's less wear and tear. There's pros and cons. There are benefits to it. One of the most important is that the house is inspected yearly by the subsidy provider, so they can't sublet it, they can't pimp it out, You can't have 4 sets of bunk beds in the room. You can't do prom weekend. So the property owner is protected, and the rents that are paid are pretty high.
Thank.
But I understand all those things that are benefits to some, but not every landlord is looking to maximize it. There are landlords out there that would gladly give you an annual lease and maintain the property in private ownership and not want necessarily someone to come around once a year to make sure it's all still rolling. I think that minimizing the government and letting the private sector kind of do its own thing is where the truth lies. I don't think that the government needs to step in other than saying, this is what we can do for incentive of you doing an annual rental. Reducing taxes more. Property taxes, maybe there's an extra bonus on top of that. Maybe there's a separate thing that we don't call the CPF. The CPF does its thing, but you create something else that helps out someone that says, listen, I'm willing to help out my community. I happen to have a second house, and I want to rent it to a year-rounder. It doesn't make any sense right now, but maybe if we can meet in the middle, I'll take a hit, and you guys take a hit, and we can make it work. I think that that's going to help our rural character, our community, more than doing these big affordable housing units that, they have their place. I'm not against that, but I would rather see your typical neighborhoods that we've always had out here stay the way they are and help the people who own them still turn a profit and let the community have people that can have a front yard and a driveway.
Anybody want to respond to that?
There are constraints on public fund. Rob mentioned when he responded initially that they're a 501c3, they're a nonprofit. So that is the private sector, but it's not for profit private sector. There are constraints, quite regulated what you can use public funds for, and it is absolutely prohibited to use public funds that inures to the financial benefit of a private individual. You absolutely cannot do that. In terms of favorable legislation or tax breaks and all of that stuff, it can be explored. It doesn't matter because the property owner is who doesn't income qualify for any of these funds is financially benefiting from. You just can't do that.
Thank you.
Jay
Anthony?
or Peter would.
You gotta just identify yourself.
Anthony Vermandois, Sag Harbor. So I'm an architect, and I deal a lot with the permitting and that sort of aspect of all of this. And one thing I can say is in Southampton town, for example, you actually need more paperwork to do a 20 by 20 addition than you do to do a 10,000 square foot McMansion. So I think one of the things that you really have to do is to give people an incentive to do these accessory apartments, which I think is a great idea, and I think you're making a step in the right direction with these incentives. But you've got to make this process easier and faster. That's key. And just to give you an example, if you're going to do an accessory apartment, you're adding bedrooms. That's automatically going to trigger for most people having to upgrade their septic systems. That in itself, that's not a bad thing. We talk about our water quality and all of that. But, and if anybody here has ever dealt with the Suffolk County Health Department before, that process alone is 3 to 4 months, if you're lucky, if you know somebody there. And that's before you can even walk into the building department. So, I think one incentive to think about doing here is, if you are going to do an accessory apartment, you go out to the top of the pile, the health department. Maybe you don't have to do the same 60 pages of HERS nonsense that everybody else has to do, just to give people an incentive to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Somebody else, we have a question over here. Jane, if you just identify yourself.
Hi, Jane Holden. I'm a lifelong resident of Sag Harbor, and I've been selling real estate here for 38 years. Now, you're talking about if someone agrees to be part of this program. Does that attach to the deed? If they sell the house, does that get passed on to the new buyer?
If it's an accessory apartment that was built exclusively to be part of the program, that would not carry over.
It will not carry
No.
over. Okay.
Because they've been getting a tax break. They have not paid taxes for that improvement to the property. So you couldn't sell an improved property.
Well,
they'd have to take it out. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
So
is
there might be a mechanism. That's kind of the stuff that we're trying
right,
to...
you have to find out, because somebody trying to sell that property, if
Right.
they've agreed to have this,
Mhm.
then it's like when you buy Suffolk County, when you go into the water authority, if you haven't finished paying for the setup, it gets carried over to the new owner. That's a very important point.
You'll be able to get out of this program, but you will have to pay back the town for whatever subsidy was put in. You'll have to remove.
what's the incentive
You'll
of
hold on.
getting into
You'll
it?
have to remove the additional door, the additional kitchen.
So you've got
So
all
you
this-
have to be. There has to be a way out for people, because people may want to. They may do this for 10 years and want to sell the house and no
But how
longer
can
want
you
this.
all of a
apart-
so all of a sudden you're going to make this legal apartment illegal, which is going to devalue the property.
No, I don't. It'll go back to the way it was. But the only
But
reason
if
you
you
get
have-
hold on, Jay, the only reason you get the extra unit, the increased density, is because you're part of a program. If you're not going to be part of that program, you don't get that extra density.
So if the new owner wanted to continue, it could be passed on.
Absolutely, the new owner could continue the program.
All right. And my other thing is they were talking about school districts. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that Tuckahoe School District is the only school district in the whole United States of America who has 4 golf courses that are taxed by farm. The people that live in Tuckahoe have the most outrageous school taxes. And when they wanted to incorporate with Southampton, all these people came out of the woodwork. No, we won't let you do this. And somehow I wish the legislature could stop taxing golf courses as if they're farmland. I mean, that goes on all over the country, but nobody feels it as bad as the people in Southampton that are in the Tuckahoe School District. Multi-million-dollar golf courses. With yeah, right, you're right. With farm taxes. And that's really scary.
Those assessment formulations are not at the town level in terms of how they're determined. So that I believe it's state. I am working with the Tuckahoe School District and trying to figure out ways of reducing the tax burden there.
Let's move on. Is there another question? Yes, you may.
In terms of the gentleman here who talked about private investment, a 600 square foot unit in East Hampton, a separate house, completely separate from the main house, can be built, including a brand new septic system, for approximately $176,000. If that were rented out by the homeowner, if the homeowner invests in that, the $176,000, rents out that unit for $1,200 a month, that unit would be paid off in 13 years and immeasurably add to the value of the home, and there would be no problem with any of your paybacks or tear downs or anything. It would be completely paid off, and it can be done for that money now. And it seems to me that especially Michael and Rob, you should be looking at that.
But adding a separate septic to an existing property would have to go through Suffolk County Health Department, and it's not allowed.
Which is hell.
Well, it
No,
probably would not be
no,
allowed.
it was allowed. It
with
was
zoning.
allowed. It is allowed. A brand new one, which incorporates, because you have an extra bedroom, basically. You have an extra bedroom, so you have to put a brand new septic system in, which costs $12,000.
Oh, for the existing home, I got it.
Yeah, and so everything's improved. The septic's improved for water quality, and you have a family that can go in there, and then it's owned at the end of that. Thank you,
Susan. Anyone else? Just one last question from us. Given that this is a regional problem, is there a way for the municipalities to work together, or do you see any opportunities for the municipalities to work together to create affordable housing in the region?
100%, right, Peter? I know we have an organization
Absolutely.
called the East End Supervisors and Mayors Association. We meet every other month. I used to chair it. I think I'm chairing it again starting next
we're
month.
hosting in March.
So, yeah, that's a great place to try to figure out some regional solutions. Peter, do you want to add to that?
Well, I just think that we have to work together. We face the same sort of challenges, and you know, I know we have worked together in terms of thinking on how we address this issue, and that, you know, there's a whole myriad of ways that each town has, you know, moved forward, whether it's, you know, affordable apartments above stores, changing zoning so that affordable apartments are allowed in limited business overlay districts. The idea now that we're looking at having some seasonal housing, temporary portable seasonal housing. We're putting out an RFP to help meet some of the needs of our businesses, particularly in Montauk, where we have, you know, the greatest density of businesses, and they really are starting to suffer trying to find help. And so, you know, we've also looked at addressing changes of zoning for residential properties that exist within central business zones to allow for a greater density. Currently, we only allow up to 4 unrelated adults living in a home. Together, we're changing that restriction. We're looking at changing that to be 8 within those central business zones.
Share ideas, and that's something we're looking at too.
That's basically it. You know, we share ideas, but I think we'll continue to share ideas to try and find approaches to deal with this problem. This problem's not going away. It's been around for a long, long time, and it's only gotten much, much worse. So we really do need to pull together as a region.
Before I pass this to Bridget, I should say, well, first, as you know, I'm a business owner in Montauk too, so that's great to hear. But also as a supervisor of Southampton,
anything we can do for Jay.
As a supervisor, though, of the town of Southampton, obviously the more East Hampton houses this workforce, the less they're driving through Southampton too. So it helps. Bridget, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Jay. I was just going to make the transportation point that obviously we as a region have to really kind of put our shoulders to the wheel on a regional transportation system that makes sense, which we don't have now. But the Scoyoc development is an example where we're getting additional trains, thanks to Assemblyman Thiel and his efforts. Those additional trains will leave Scoyoc and arrive at Montauk twice in the morning, starting in 2019. So.
Well, that's an ideal segue, because I think one of the forums that we're hoping to have the next year or so is about transportation. So we're going to wrap this up now. Oh, I'm sorry.
You mentioned something about increasing the density of unrelated persons living in a home in the central business zones. What are the central business zones?
So the question was, I mentioned that we're talking about increasing the allowed density within residential homes in a central business district zoning overlay, and basically central business is, you know, retail, downtown Montauk, for instance. So, you know, an area that has a residential home that normally wouldn't be permitted there, just by the fact that the zoning over the years is pre-existing non-conforming. We didn't want to change the amount of density within residential neighborhoods because, you know, we feel that would have some negative impacts. So if there are existing residences that are already in the middle of downtown business areas, that they might be appropriate for increasing density. So we're looking into that as potential.
Thank you. Anybody else before I wrap this up? Anthony?
I guess I'll just add one thing here, just about density, and this is really Sag Harbor specific. It doesn't really pertain to the other hamlets, which have a different historic character than Sag Harbor does. If you look at like old photographs, old fire insurance maps, old census records, central inner part of Sag Harbor, Main Street, the inner historic district, was actually more built up with 2- and 3-story buildings 120 years ago than it is now. You know, those buildings have been torn down, replaced by 1-story retail, like the Shopping Cove or parking lots, like on Division Street. So, understanding that there's all sorts of infrastructure issues that we would have to deal with, namely, first being obviously parking, and second, close second being wastewater. You know, it seems like historically, there's actually in Sag Harbor Village, there's a way to historically bring in that extra density and apartments above stores and things like that. So,
well, we are also looking at doing that in areas like downtown Montauk, where many of the businesses currently are only 1 story tall, but due to the threat of sea level rise and becoming a more resilient community, some of the recommendations of our hamlet studies are that we allow buildings to go up multiple stories. Part of that would be just necessary to raise the ground floor elevations above flood area. And also with the downtown sewer district being contemplated, that would allow us to have the capacity to address the flows from affordable apartments above.
Michael?
Just look at the health and the vitality of the village areas that have more apartments in them. Look at how healthy and vital Sag Harbor is. And then, unfortunately, you have the Southamptons and East Hampton villages where they don't have apartments and they don't have people who are living there. And that's why it's important to have people living in communities, in villages, and where they can walk to shops and see each other. So I know it's a wastewater issue, and it's something that we need to solve.
Rob?
As a matter of a summary comment, I hope that in addition to coordinating what we're doing between the two towns, I hope we can agree on what the magnitude of the challenge is, what a reasonable time frame is to meet those challenges, and what are the various ways in which both publicly and privately or jointly we're going to solve these things incrementally to meet the overall demand, and that we have some way by which to monitor our progress and report what we're doing to our community, because we all need it, and I think we need to be responsible for and to what it is this challenge is and its magnitude.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for coming. This was the first Express session. The next one is planned for next month on February 23rd, where we'll be talking about the impact of Airbnb and online rentals on not only on the obvious hotel industry here, but as well as the real estate market and as well as Main Street business. We hope you'll come. This sold out, as I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks ago. If you would like to make reservations for the next one on February 23rd, you can speak to Ellen Diogardi right there with her hand up. We'd also like to keep this conversation going. We're planning for next week's issue to explore in the paper in a very large way the conversation that we had here today. We'd also like to welcome your comments as you go home and think about what you heard. Please feel free to write letters to the editor at letters@sagharborexpress.com, or you can call Catherine Nanu, who is the editor of the paper, directly at 631-725-1700. For those of you who are interested in making reservations online, if you want to wait, you can go to expresssessions.eventbrite.com to buy tickets. And once again, we'd like to thank our sponsors for making today's event possible, including our presenting sponsor, GN Ferrara Certified Public Accountants, the Sag Harbor Variety Store, Attorney John Leonard, the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce, B&B Bank, the Washwick Agency, and Burke and Sullivan Attorneys at Law. And we also want to thank the folks at LTV for helping us out and the American Hotel for hosting it. Good afternoon, and thank you very much.